present some issues of free software, just a fraction of what I normally have to say about it, and something about how this relates to copyright. So first of all, free software, the free means elefthero. It does not mean dorian. We're not talking about price at all. Price is a side issue, a detail. We're not concerned with whether you paid to get the copy you have. We're concerned with what it is you have. Once you have a copy, does it respect your freedom or does it attack your freedom? Free software is software that respects users' freedom and community. So a computer just executes instructions that come from a program. The program, by which instructions it contains, determines what computing the computer will do. The same computer could do any different computing activity given the right program to tell it which activity to do. It could do anything at all except for the things that are impossible. There are some limits. We don't know how to make a computer do this. But within the limits of the possible, the same computer will do anything. So who gives the instructions to your computer? You may think it's you, when really it's someone else. You may think your computer obeys you, when really it obeys the real master first, and obeys you only second, only when the real master permits it to obey you. With a program, there are two possibilities. Either the users control the program, or the program controls the users. It's always one or the other because there's no other possibility. So, when the users control the program, that's free software. What is freedom? Freedom is control of your own life. Control of the activities you do in your life. So if you use a program to do the activity, control of the activity requires control of the program. So when users have control over the program, that program respects the user's freedom and community, and so it's free software. In order for users to have control of the program, they need the four essential freedoms. These four freedoms are the concrete criteria for free software. Freedom 0 is the freedom to run the program however you wish for any purpose. Freedom 1, if you have a portable tracking and surveillance device, please switch it off, or at least try, because it may continue running and disobey you. So, freedom 1 is the freedom to study how the program functions and change it to function the way you wish. In order for that to be a practical possibility, you need the source code. On the left, you will see some source code. It looks like a combination of English and math. If you've learned that programming language, you can read the program, understand what it does, and change it to do something else. To run it, we convert it into an executable, which is enigmatic ones and zeros. For a small program like this, yes, a programmer could figure out what those ones and zeros mean. For a large program, that job is tremendously hard, almost impossible, and it's called reverse engineering, and the people who do it are real wizards. So if you said to a user, yes, you're free to change the program, but you'll have to reverse engineer it first, that's mocking the user. That's a mockery of freedom. It's not real practical freedom to change the program. So, freedom 1 requires availability of source code to the users. These two freedoms give the user separate control over the program. Separate control means I'm free to change my copies, and you are free to change your copies, and you are free to change your copies. But only separately. That's essential, but not enough. because most users are not programmers. They do other things in life. They don't know how to study and change source code, but they deserve control over the software they use. The way they get it is through collective control of the program. Collective control means that users are free to work together to exercise control over what that program does. At the top, you can see a group of users who are working together to change the program, exercising collective control. Two of them are actually changing the code. They must be programmers if they're doing that. The third, the one at the left, is not changing the code. Maybe he doesn't know how. He's a non-programmer, but because he's discussing with the other two what changes to make, he gets to participate in exercising control of what that program does. Those who collaborate are those who choose to collaborate. Three at the top are collaborating, and then there are two other users who are not part of the group, and they use the original unchanged program. Why aren't they working together? We don't know. It's not visible. Perhaps they don't know about each other. Perhaps they disagree about what they want. Maybe those two people want to prefer the old version, or maybe they want different changes. Or maybe they will start working together tomorrow. It's entirely up to them. Collective control requires two more essential freedoms. Freedom 2 is the freedom to make exact copies and then give or sell them to others when you wish. And freedom 3 is to make copies of your modified versions and give or sell them to others when you wish. These two freedoms make collective control possible, because with these two freedoms, the members of the group can distribute their changed versions to each other. When one in the group makes a modified version, with freedom 3, she's free to make copies of that and distribute them to others. Then they, with freedom 2, can make more copies of that version and distribute them to the rest in the group. They're also free to offer copies to other users. They can even publish their versions, meaning offer them to everybody. One part of freedom 2 is especially important, and that is when we're talking about non-commercial redistribution between people. That is sharing. Sharing means non-commercial redistribution of exact copies. And sharing is the basis of society in the digital world. To attack sharing is to attack society. It is viciously antisocial. We must not tolerate anyone attacking sharing. That is, we must not tolerate any interference with the freedom to share copies. It must be lawful to share copies of all published works. But remember, sharing is a rather specific thing. It's non-commercial redistribution of exact copies with no changes. When we call a work free, that's a lot broader. That's all 4 of the 4 freedoms, including commercial redistribution, including modified versions. So freedom to share is narrow, but it has to apply to every published work. When a work is free, that's much broader, but it only applies to some kinds of works. So, if the program comes with these 4 freedoms, then we call it free software, and the users control the program, and it respects their freedom and community. But if one of these freedoms is missing or incomplete, then the users do not control the program. So instead, the program controls the users, and the owner controls the program. So this program, because it is non-free, generates a system of unjust power. power for the owner over the users. This is why every non-free program is an injustice. Non-free software is wrong. It should not exist. Developing non-free software is attacking society. It makes the world a worse place. It's better to do nothing than develop a non-free program. If you do nothing, at least you're not doing any harm to the world. Developing non-free software is doing harm. So, this power is an injustice. But it leads to other injustices. Because nowadays the developers know the power that they have. And they're constantly looking for ways to utilize that power to push the users down even further by mistreating them. They put malicious functionalities into the program. You've heard the term malware. Malware means software designed to mistreat the user. Most discussions of malware are half-blind. They only see half the world of malware, the viruses or the things that are injected into the computer that weren't supposed to be in it. And they ignore the other half of the world of malware, which is proprietary software. Proprietary software is very often malware. It's the usual case. It's not a rare exception. It's the usual case. You see, the owner knows it has power over the users. It knows that if it puts malicious functionalities into the program, the users will not be able to fix it. It will not be able to remove the malicious functionalities. In many cases, they won't even be able to determine that the malicious functionalities are there. It's only by luck that they find out, or by sophisticated research. So the power that the proprietary developers have over the users corrupts them systematically. And their corruption is to make the programs mistreat the users. For instance, they spy on users. This is an example. This is the Amazon swindle, Amazon's ebook reader. It reports what the user reads. Every so often, it sends the name of the book and the page number to Amazon servers. It sends other information as well. This is one example, but spying is very common. There are spy functionalities in Windows, in Mac OS, in Flash Player, in nearly all portable phones, and in lots of application programs. For instance, flashlight apps for phones spy on the user. You might wonder, why does a flashlight app need to communicate with other sites? It doesn't need the help or computing of a server to turn on the light of the screen. But it communicates to various servers just to spy on people. And then there are all these streaming apps whose purpose is, among other things, to spy on people, because they require users to identify themselves, and then they enable the remote site to determine exactly what the user watches or listens to. So this is one reason we need to reject things like Spotify and Netflix, to protect ourselves from massive surveillance. Then there is Digital Restrictions Management, DRM, the malicious functionality of stopping users from doing what they want to do. For instance, stopping them from sharing copies. There is DRM code in Windows, in Mac OS, in the iThings. I'm pretty sure it's in Android, in Flash Player, in the Amazon swindle, and many other programs. Then there are backdoors. The Amazon swindle has a backdoor for remotely erasing books. We know about this because in 2009, Amazon remotely erased thousands of copies of a particular book in an Orwellian act. What was the book? 1984 by George Orwell. There was a lot of criticism, so Amazon promised it would never do this again unless ordered to by the state. If you have read 1984, which is about a tyrannical state that burned books it didn't like, that kind of promise is not very comforting, is it? But it doesn't matter because Amazon didn't take the promise seriously. Amazon waited a few years and started remotely erasing books again. Then there is direct censorship. Apple was the pioneer of censorship of applications. In the iPhone, the user could not freely install applications of his own choice. He could only install programs approved by Apple that were placed in Apple's store. The users, when they found ways to defeat this censorship, called it jailbreaking, recognizing in effect that these computers are jails for their users. They're designed to be jails. Then there are universal backdoors. Could you open the can, please? Thanks. A universal backdoor, thank you, gives someone the power to remotely change the software. It's called universal because by changing the software, they can do absolutely any nasty thing to you. First, they just have to install the code to do the nasty thing, and then they tell it to do it. Windows has had a universal backdoor at least since Windows XP. Microsoft did not admit this, but users proved it was true. There's also a universal backdoor in the Amazon swindle and in nearly all portable phones. In portable phones, they use it to convert them into full-time listening devices. Once they're converted, they listen all the time and they transmit all the conversation they hear. And you don't have to speak right into the microphone. It can listen to you from over there. Remember, it has a speakerphone mode. It can turn that on whenever the universal backdoor directs it to. So it can hear all the conversation in the room and send that to Big Brother. And if you think you can get your privacy back by turning it off, well, there's no off switch. There is a "would you be so kind as to shut yourself off" request button. But once they have converted the phone into a listening device, it doesn't really shut off. Instead, it keeps running and listening and transmitting. And to prove that a corrupt software developer can sabotage users in all sorts of ways, when Microsoft finds security bugs in Windows, it shows them to the US National Security Agency, a spy agency, before fixing them. In other words, it betrays its own clients directly, explicitly to Big Brother. These are just a few of the examples we know. For many more examples, look at GNU.org/proprietary. But these examples are enough to show that most people who use proprietary software are victims of proprietary malware. So you've got to expect, if you use proprietary software, it's mistreating you. Why do they do it? Because they find it profitable. They have found ways to gain at the expense of their own users by putting malicious functionalities into the code. So, there are thousands of proprietary programs, and some of them we know are malware, and the rest we don't know, and we can't check. There's no way to find out. They won't let us examine the source code, but just examining the source code is not enough. You've got to compile it yourself. You've got to really take control of the code away from them in order to be able to trust it rationally. So with a proprietary program, either it's proved malware or it's possible malware. It might be malware and we can't tell. But there's never a way to prove that a given proprietary program is not malware. I'm sure there are proprietary programs with no malicious functionalities. It would be too unlikely if there were absolutely none of them, but we can't identify any of them. So basically, the only way to use a proprietary program, the only way to trust a proprietary program is with blind faith. Typically in a company that has betrayed such faith already, and you'd be a fool to trust them. Don't be a fool. So you've got to escape to the free world, which we built with the GNU operating system and the Linux kernel. I started developing GNU in 1984. By 1990, GNU was complete except for one major component, the kernel. We started developing a kernel, but it took many, many years. I chose a design that was too advanced and it became a research project. However, in 1991, Torvalds developed a kernel called Linux, which was proprietary software at the time. However, in '92, he made it free software. And then it was possible to take Linux and fill the last gap in GNU, making an operating system that was entirely free software and was basically the GNU system, but also contained Linux. So please, when you talk about using this system, please call it GNU/Linux. If you call the whole thing Linux, then you're attributing our work to someone else who came later and did less, and that's an insulting way to treat us. Please don't ever do that. You'll find that many people do disrespect our work in that way, and it causes a lot of harm to our efforts to give people freedom. People have less freedom because so many people attribute our work to someone else. So you're not just being unfair to us, you're actually hindering the effort to free people if you call the system Linux. GNU/Linux is basically a free system, but in practice it's not entirely so. The reason is, in every distro, they add other programs. They add whatever programs they wish. Well, often some of the programs they add are non-free, and that makes a system which is not entirely free. There are over 1,000 GNU/Linux distros, and most of them are non-free. There are around 10 free distros. Look at gnu.org/distros for information about them. So, the way you make a program free is with a license that's based on copyright. Today's copyright law is badly designed. It was a choice that is harmful to society in many ways. There are many bad things about today's copyright law, but the particular one I mean here is that everything that's written is automatically copyrighted. This is why every program is copyrighted. Just by writing the program down, it becomes copyrighted. And copyright law, by default, says that users do not have the 4 freedoms. It denies those 4 freedoms. So the users are not allowed to copy it or redistribute it or change it. And in many countries, they're not even allowed to run it, because running it requires copying it into memory, and that's not allowed either. Well, how does a program get to be free? Through an explicit declaration by the copyright holders, giving every user the 4 freedoms. And that way the users have the 4 freedoms under copyright law. There are many ways to write such a declaration. So there are many different free software licenses. That declaration is called a free software license. This is what free software license means. It means a statement by the copyright holders that gives the users the 4 freedoms explicitly. We hope that it's written in a clear way so that there is no doubt about precisely what freedoms the users have. But there are different ways to do this. Free software licenses are not all alike. They all have to give the 4 freedoms, but there's more than one way to do that. The 2 main categories of free licenses, I say free licenses because these licenses don't have to be limited to software. The 2 main categories of free licenses are weak, lax, permissive licenses and copyleft. A lax, permissive license doesn't know how to say no. It says, oh, do anything with this. Some hackers think that the best way to help society is to tell others, oh, do anything you like to anybody you like. But that doesn't establish freedom. The problem is, well, it's true. If you get that copy, you have freedom. The problem is, companies can get that version, and they can turn that code into a proprietary software product and use it to have power over other users. And they're allowed to do this because the original developer's license says they can. It gives permission for this. So this is what happens. But this is not a good outcome. These users don't have freedom. In this scenario, the company got freedom, but the users of the modified version don't get that freedom. In 1985, when I had a GNU program to release, GNU Emacs it was, I had already seen this happen. I knew that if I released GNU Emacs under a lax, permissive license, that the freedom would not reach the users. Some middleman would get my version as free software and would turn it into a proprietary program and pass that on to users, and they would not have freedom. They'd be running my code, but I would have given them my code, but I would have failed to give them freedom. Many developers are happy with that because it flatters their ego. They say, look at all the people who are running my code. I've had a big effect on the world. But what kind of effect? Unfortunately, in that case, the effect does not include giving users freedom. Not when this happens. So I invented a way to stop this. It's called copyleft. And it's implemented in the GNU General Public License. The GNU General Public License says, you can redistribute this. You can change this and redistribute this. But there's a requirement about how you redistribute it. Whenever you redistribute a copy, changed or not, that copy must carry the same freedoms that you got from me. So the middleman must pass along the freedoms that he got from me. And thus, the users are required to receive freedom, and thus the freedom goes everywhere. Wherever the code goes, the freedom goes with it. And what do the companies do then? They cooperate with us. You see, when a company wants to distribute an improved version, but the GNU GPL says they have to distribute that version with source code under the GNU GPL, they realize that the best way for them to do that is to join the project and cooperate with the developers. Usually. So what we bring about is this. So I'm almost finished, but I should mention why I never use the term open source. I started the free software movement in 1983 as a campaign for freedom. In 1998, when the GNU/Linux system had some success, there were a lot of people in the community, and they had different political views. Some agreed with the free software movement, but some of them just liked the free software, and they thought our political ideas were too radical. So in 1998, some of them coined the term open source as a form of co-optation to disconnect our work from our ideals. They wanted to talk about the free programs and forget about freedom. Forget about right and wrong. Forget about injustice. With their new term, they could develop a different discourse based on different values and saying different things. Their discourse presents it as purely a matter of what the developer likes. The part they omitted was the idea that users have freedoms that developers are obligated to respect. For them, in open source, the developers are entitled to subjugate and mistreat users if they want. We say if you develop and release a program, it's your moral duty to respect the freedom of users to change it and redistribute it. In open source, they say, if you develop and release a program, we recommend you consider letting users change and redistribute it, because then they could improve the quality of the source code. So, here you see the difference. We in free software, we say we demand freedom, users deserve freedom, and open source people say it would be nice to have better code quality. The difference is at the foundation level, the level of values. But they were the majority, and they had the support of almost all the businesses. The politicians and the mass media follow the businesses, and that's why the mass media almost always say open source. They don't talk about free software. And this has misled the public. Most people who have heard of me think I advocate open source. And they tell each other that I advocate open source. It's just not true. So I've seen articles that call me the father of open source. I send a letter to the editor saying, if I'm the father of open source, it was conceived through artificial insemination using stolen sperm without my knowledge or consent. Then I explain the ideas of the free software movement, which is the real purpose, the serious purpose of the letter. But it's always nice to start with a joke. You can help us by saying free software and by never saying open source. If you ever say open source, you're diluting the message of freedom. Why do that? Of course, you're free to express your views, whatever they are. But if you agree that what matters is the user's freedom, show your support by never saying open source. That's why I never use the term open source to describe the program. Because I'm not for open source, and I'm not against closed source. I'm for free software, and I'm against user subjugating proprietary software. I want to focus attention on the issues of injustice that open source was intended to forget. The one other crucial point is that schools should teach exclusively free software. And they should teach their students why they teach exclusively free software, that this is a matter of civic duty, because the school has a social mission to educate good citizens for a society that is strong, capable, independent, cooperating, and free. Teaching kids to use proprietary software is as bad as teaching them to smoke tobacco. It's getting them addicted. And that's why the companies hand out gratis copies or low-priced copies. They want to get people addicted. But in addition, and the school should refuse to participate in that. When I say school, it means anything from nursery school to university and adult education. All levels and kinds of schools raise the same issue about making people dependent and addicted. In addition, schools should teach people to share and cooperate. So every class should have this rule. Students, if you bring software to class, you may not keep it for yourself. You must share copies with the rest of the class, including source code in case someone wants to learn, because this class is a place where we share our knowledge. Therefore, you may not bring proprietary software to class unless it's for reverse engineering. The school, to set a good example, must follow its own rule. It must bring only free software to class and share copies, including source code, with those in the class that want copies, except for any reverse engineering exercises. Finally, there is education in programming. Every program embodies knowledge. If it's proprietary, it denies that knowledge to the students. It obstructs education and is the enemy of the spirit of education, so it should never be tolerated in a school except to do reverse engineering on it. But if the program is free, it makes the knowledge available to the students. A free program supports the spirit of education, and therefore schools should encourage learning about software by insisting that all programs in the school be free. Human rights depend on each other. If you lose one human right, it becomes hard to defend other human rights. Nowadays, since we use computing for so many important things, free software, in other words, control of our own computing, has become one of the essential human rights that we must defend so we can defend the others. And that sometimes means making a sacrifice. Maybe it's inconvenient to do without a certain non-free program, but we must make that sacrifice for freedom's sake. How can you help us? If you're a programmer, write free software. Start by contributing to existing free software projects. When you've done that 20 times, you'll know how to run a project. But if you're not a programmer, you can organize campaigning for free software. You can give speeches like this. You can do administrative work for a free software activist group. You can help persuade schools and governments to switch to free software. For schools, look at GNU.org/education. For governments, look at GNU.org/philosophy/governmentfreesoftware.html. If you're an expert user, help other users. Start a GNU/Linux user group. And just saying free software helps our cause. So I should say a little bit about Creative Commons licenses and other licenses that are relevant. First of all, I think that all works of practical use ought to be free. In other words, if the purpose of the work is to use it to do practical jobs, then that work should be free. So, thank you. So if the work is not made to be used to do practical jobs, then I don't think it needs to be free. But the minimum freedom is freedom to share copies. If you want a free license, you can use the GNU GPL for any kind of work. For version 3 of the GNU GPL is designed for all kinds of works. It's not limited to software. Meanwhile, of the 6 Creative Commons licenses, 2 of them are free. Those are CC Attribution and CC Share Alike. CC Attribution is a lax, permissive pushover license that doesn't know how to say no. But there are some special cases where that's the right thing to do. CC Share Alike is a kind of copyleft. The other Creative Commons licenses are non-free, but I think they're okay for art and opinion. You'll notice that the license I want for recordings of my speeches is CC No Derivatives. I don't want people distributing modified versions of my talks, which would give the wrong idea of what I stand for. So that's a non-free license, but speeches stating opinions are not designed to do practical work with. That's not their purpose. Their purpose is showing people a set of opinions. It's okay for that kind of work to be non-free. So now I guess I'm ready for the questions.
So, anyone for a question for Richard?
Thank you for the speech. What do you think about the diaspora social network? Could it be the new free Facebook?
Well, there's a confusion there. The terms free and non-free, as they apply to programs, can be generalized to other kinds of works. What is a work? It's something that in some sense is written down. It doesn't have to consist of text. It could be images or sound. But the point is, the free versus non-free is a distinction that makes sense for a work. But Facebook is not a work. It's a service. It's a different kind of thing. Whether a work is free has to do with whether you're free to make copies of it and distribute them. You can't make a copy of Facebook and distribute it. It's impossible. Whether you're allowed to do it or not is a silly question because it's impossible. As a used of Facebook, you wouldn't be able even to try. Services raise different ethical issues. We should be careful of generalizing too far. This is something that techies like to do. They see an idea that makes sense in one area and they try to generalize it to every area of life, and that often doesn't make sense. Servers and services raise different ethical issues. So you'll notice I condemn Facebook for snooping on people. Well, that is something that a service can do. But I wouldn't call it non-free because copying and modifying and distributing modified versions of services doesn't make sense at all.
So, depending on the matter of the privacy.
But you but you asked about diaspora. I've never used it. But I think it's okay. However, that's not guaranteed. The fact is that anyone running a diaspora node could be snooping on it for Big Brother. One important question is whether you can contact the node through Tor. Because if you can't contact it through Tor, then it knows where you are all the time. And that is a form of snooping that is extremely dangerous.
Thank you for your answer.
You talked about some GNU Linux distributions. There's some problems though. There are devices that require binary terminal to run. What about those things? What can you do?
If you want freedom, don't use those devices.
But there are no alternatives.
Yes, there are. Yes, there are. It's not necessarily easy. Sometimes freedom requires a sacrifice. I'm using this machine because the peripherals work without non-free software. It's no accident that I have a machine that works. I chose one based on advice from experts, so it would work. I wish that we could make being free as easy as falling off a log. We're doing the best we can. The point is that when you see that your freedom requires a sacrifice, at that point we get to see how important freedom is to you. If you don't really want to make a sacrifice, you can say, oh, but I have no choice. It would be inconvenient to get a computer that runs in freedom. Well, that's looking for an excuse to give up. And there are others who don't even look for an excuse. They just dismiss the idea of accepting any inconvenience. There are people who I have suggested, why not switch from this to free software? And they say, well, when you show me a free program that does all of these things equally well with no inconveniences, then I'll switch. If you think about it, what they're really saying is that for them, freedom is of zero value, and zero is the size of sacrifice that they're willing to make for their freedom. I can't make them change their mind. All I can do is use them as examples of foolishness and talk about them to others. But you know, we had to work for years to reach the point where there was a machine that works in freedom. It wasn't easy. And we're still working on trying to advance, but it's not easy. Often it requires reverse engineering. Those of you who are really smart and capable, do reverse engineering. You can advance us towards supporting more of those peripherals.
Is there any place where we can see what hardware you're running or that we can use?
Oh, sorry. You mean, can someone tell what hardware you are running?
No, there's a list.
Oh, you want advice about which hardware is properly supported by free software? Is that it? Yeah. Well, we have a couple of things. We have hnode.org, and we have FSF product endorsements at fsf.org/resources/HW.
I would like to ask you your opinion about big evil corporations like Microsoft making some steps on free software, using as an example XPAT or MIT licenses.
Well, let's not use the confusing term MIT license. MIT uses many licenses, and that term is ambiguous. There are two different licenses, at least, that are sometimes called, quote, the MIT license, unquote. But more to the point, if a company develops free software and releases it, and that free software functions in the free world, it's a contribution. Doesn't matter what company it is or what else that company does, that act is a contribution. That doesn't excuse wrong if the company does wrong. You have to be prepared to realize that a company, just as an individual can do many things, and some might be good and others might be bad, a company can do many things, and some might be good and some might be bad. So we have to look at each thing and judge it for what it is. So nowadays, Microsoft actually has released, I believe, some free software that is actually useful in the free world. Of course, running it on Windows is not running it in the free world. You don't have freedom if you're running any version of Windows. But those programs actually do run on GNU/Linux. Well, that's nice, thank you for that. But that doesn't reduce the wrong of Microsoft's non-free software.
I'd like to ask you, when you choose a kernel for your GNU Foundation suite, why did you use Linux kernel instead of BSD Unix kernel? Which
well, first of all, we didn't make that choice. Second, Linux was available before BSD. So Linux, the kernel, was available for us to use at a time when BSD, including its kernel, were not available yet. This was partly because of the Unix Systems Lab lawsuit. And the other thing is that Linux was developed actually to fit into the GNU system. Torvalds developed it with the pieces of the GNU system. But we're not the ones who chose it, because at that point, which was in 1992, we were working on our own kernel and we thought it would be working next month. But other people started using the GNU system with Linux. And once that got to be working well enough, we joined them.
First of all, your talk has been really inspiring, and I think I will put as a goal to put a free software running on my Mac, if I can. Now, you mentioned again when we were talking about the Facebook, as a use of Facebook instead of as a user, was this intentional?
Yes, absolutely. Facebook does not have users. Facebook has users. Because Facebook is using them.
Makes sense, thank you.
There are very large number of initiatives that they use the term, quote, open in their name, but the ethical foreground is similar or the same with the free software ethical background. Do you agree that they continue to use the term open in their name, or change it to free?
We have to look separately at the question of what they are doing and what ethical position they stand for and their name. These are separate things. We can think about any one of them and then we can relate them. So there are many initiatives that are developing free software or free hardware designs and use the term open. Well, since those programs or hardware designs are free, they're ethical. So the work they're doing is good. That's one question, to judge the work they're doing. Another is, what is their stand on this ethical question? In my experience, when organizations use the term open, they usually do not take a clear or explicit ethical stand about freedom. It doesn't occur to them to do so, because they have been influenced by the open chain of thought, that kind of ideas. And those ideas don't say that you should take a stand for freedom. So mostly they don't do that, which is unfortunate. They could, but they don't. Now, maybe there are some that do take a stand, but mostly they don't. And the reason is, mostly, if you've been influenced by other people's discourse about open, you will not have got the idea of taking a stand for freedom. Because those other people don't talk about that. If they're the ones who influenced you, they never told you that. But there are some exceptions. And if someone uses the term open but still takes a stand for freedom, well, that does help somewhat. But I would still urge them to switch and say free instead of open, because every time you say open, you're mainly suggesting that people listen to those instead of to us. If you say the word open, the people you influence will tend to listen to the others that say open. And most of them don't talk about freedom and don't make freedom an explicit issue. If you say free or elefthero, you will direct them to listen to us, and you know what we'll say to them.
I'm just trying to wrap the crowdsourced questions right now. Let's be practical for the moment.
Wait. I have made a couple of small changes in a couple of them, basically to avoid the word open. Now, you should have told people when you ask for questions, do not use the terms open or closed in these questions, because Stallman will refuse to answer them that way. If you had said this to the public at the beginning, you would have educated them. It was an opportunity to show people the difference between free and open. But I still will not answer questions substantively about open source. I'll just say I don't agree with open source.
So there's the last question for the...
Mr. Stallman, you published an article about ZFS and general public license on Linux.
Yes.
I read it and I had two feelings. The first feeling was that as a Solaris user, it's too late to read an article like that. And the other bit of feeling is that I had to forget ZFS in the Libre world. Do I have to do that?
Not necessarily.
I know.
They should.
Thank you.
We need to persuade Oracle to relicense its code. There are other contributors in that version of ZFS, but I'm sure they'll cooperate once Oracle removes the obstacle.
We leave something that was a star or an open thing previously. Why don't we leave it as ZFS?
I'm sorry, that's not a meaningful question. ZFS is free software. It's under a license that is incompatible with the GNU General Public License. And that violates the point of copyleft, which is to say, if you use this code in something bigger, the something bigger has to be under this same license. That's what the GNU General Public License says. That's the principle of copyleft. And ZFS has an incompatible condition. Now, if it were under a lax permissive license, you could add it to Linux. There'd be no conflict. But the license of ZFS is not a lax permissive license either. It's another kind of free license. And these two just, they collide. What Oracle should do is permit releasing, it should permit using the code of ZFS under the GNU General Public License, as well as under the CDDL. Should give people this additional option. And then the other contributors to that version of ZFS, they could do the same thing, and then it would be no problem legally to link ZFS and Linux.
Let's try to be more practical. We have the problem of free riding. What are the best practices to defend free software in individual, local, and public scale?
I don't think free riding is a problem.
Fair enough.
I reject the idea that if you use a free program and you don't contribute somehow, that you're that you're hurting the rest of us. It's not true. You're welcome to use the free program. And I hope you will find ways to contribute. But I won't say that you don't deserve to use the program if you're not contributing. And that's what that propaganda term free rider implies. It's based on an economistic mindset, which is obsessed with how much money is being brought in for development of the software over and above respecting users' freedom. But why do we want to judge by how much money is brought in? That really comes from a picture where people only ask, what does the program do, and how do we raise money to make it do those things, and they ignore freedom. So it's a kind of mindset that assumes that a proprietary program is just as good as a free program. It's only judging by what functionality they have. Well, I think that's totally backwards. I say that a free program is better than nothing, and a proprietary program is worse than nothing. And I literally mean that, worse than nothing. When I have to choose between a proprietary program and nothing, I choose nothing. So it's a mistake to compare them in terms of efficiency of production. Suppose we want to compare nourishing food and poison. Well, you could compare them based on efficiency of production and say, look, by making poison instead, we can make more. But people shouldn't eat the poison. Proprietary software ethically is poison. It's better to make this much free software than make this much proprietary software.
Okay, speaking about free versus proprietary, what are your thoughts on attracting developer talent to free software projects, especially when that talent is scarce and private companies reward better or claim superior in technical terms?
Well, people who are wise, well, this question is incoherent because it's asking at least two different questions and mixing them up.
Okay.
Why choose free software? Well, if you value your freedom, you need to choose free software. You need to reject non-free software. Then, why develop free software? Because you have a conscience. If you recognize that developing non-free software is making the world a worse place, then you won't do it. And if you're a programmer, you can develop free software. And then, what a silly thing it would be to choose software mainly because of how technically advanced this one or that one is. You know, if there's a program that is very technically advanced and I have to give up my freedom in order to use it, and there's a program that's less advanced but it respects my freedom, the choice is obvious. I choose my freedom. I won't give up my freedom to use that program. I will keep my freedom and use that program. So once you see what's at stake, the choice is obvious.
Okay, but the monetary reward thing?
Reward for what exactly? For using the program?
For contributing.
Oh, well, if you're a corrupt person who's willing to do evil because they pay you, I can see that rationally speaking, such a person might be led to develop proprietary software. But I won't. And I hope you won't either.
Within the EU, we are currently in a copyright reform consultation process.
Yes.
Yeah. Imagine you are the one and only legislator with exclusive power. What would you do? What would your priorities be?
I would legalize sharing copies of any published work. Further, I would prevent any of the methods of denying people that freedom in practice once they have got it in principle. For instance, making systems with digital restrictions management should be, or selling them, should be a crime. Because, why? Because DRM is a technical way of stopping people from sharing. So if we legalize sharing, but everything is published with DRM, people won't actually be able to share. So we must prevent DRM from denying people this freedom once they've got it. Then there are legal methods of stopping people from sharing, namely contracts, also referred to as end-user license agreements. End-user license agreement provisions that deny people the freedom to share and other unjust provisions should be legally void. No matter when the contract was signed, no matter where the contract was agreed to, they should have no force.
Well, speaking about free software, I suppose this operates in the field of the free market economy. So, in which sense does free software actually improve or challenge free market as we know it today?
Well, there is no contradiction between free software and commerce. The term free market is very much misunderstood. Every market requires regulation, and every market has rules and regulations. Free market tends to mean, when used somewhat rationally, that everybody is free to participate in the market by the same rules that apply to everyone else. There's no conflict between this and free software. With free software, you're free to make copies and sell them. You're also free to accept pay for developing a program. We have no opposition. We're not opposed to that at all. We wouldn't want to stop those things. In fact, there are companies that make a profit from releasing free software that they develop, and we are in favor of it. So, no, there is no opposition at all between free software and a free market. But there are certain business practices that are unjust because they deny users freedom, and we are against those.
In this free market economy, we all know that it's based on information. Do you believe that, what do you think about the free market in which competition is not based on controlling information, but on other factors?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I agree with the premise. It's a ridiculous oversimplification to say that the free market is based on information. It's like saying you're based on your stomach. Well, that's one organ out of hundreds that you've got, and they're all important. I'm not sure the stomach is actually more important than your heart or your liver or your lungs or your skin, or your brain. So when they say the free market is based on information, that's often connected with the idea that the market calculates the right prices for things, and that enables production to go smoothly. Well, it can do that. There's no conflict between free software and that. It doesn't always work entirely well, partly because the companies, powerful companies, corrupt and pervert the market mechanism along with everything else they corrupt and pervert.
Let's keep to something else. Free software versus free hardware, the two sides of the same coin.
I decided it's more meaningful to talk about hardware designs as free or non-free. You see, a hardware design is a work, and the concept of free versus non-free makes sense for any kind of work. If you have a work that's a hardware design, you can ask whether the four freedoms, whether the users who have copies of that work have the four freedoms. And I think they should, if we're talking about a hardware design for hardware that does something, because then the design is a work made for practical use. Works made for practical use should all be free, including hardware designs. See gnu.org/philosophy/freehardwaredesigns.html for everything about this issue.
Well, another thing, privacy versus transparency? What's the golden ratio here?
People should have privacy. Governments and to some extent companies must provide transparency. You see, states don't have rights. They don't exist for themselves. They exist for the people. It's people that have rights. As for companies, sometimes they're acting for people, so to a certain extent, the people's rights apply to what they do in these companies, but not 100%. Companies are not people, and they shouldn't be treated like people. They're not entitled to the rights that people are entitled to.
Okay. Let's go to something else now. Suggestions like confidential transactions promise to make Bitcoin closer to anonymous. Is that good or bad? Or what would your ideal internet means of exchange be?
Well, it's very important to have anonymous payment on the internet. I don't do digital payments. I've never bought anything on the internet. Or if I ever did, it was years ago, once or twice. I can't remember even. But I don't do it because I don't want to be snooped on. I buy things paying cash.
So you think that the digital currency like Bitcoin is something closer to that?
Well, Bitcoin currently is not anonymous. That's a major flaw of Bitcoin. Maybe it can be fixed. We have our own anonymous payment system called GNU Taler. That's taler.net. But it's quite different from Bitcoin. It's not a currency. It's just a payment system. The payments are always measured in some other currency. And it's set up so that the payer is anonymous, but the payee is not. So this is to prevent it from being used for tax evasion. The usage scenario for Taler is users pay for things. And the Taler system itself does not permit any way to identify them. And, of course, assuming that they have protected themselves in other ways. For instance, they don't keep cookies, they go through Tor. Then the service that they paid can't tell who they are. If they bought a download, they can get the download, and the service gets paid but doesn't know who they are. And it can't tell that the person who bought this today is the same person who bought that yesterday. There were two separate transactions, and the service can't relate them. But the service, in order to get its money, has to take the payments to the Taler agency, which knows its identity. So the business that gets paid cannot hide these payments. And this is better than Bitcoin would be if it were anonymous.
Oh, great.
Because we absolutely need to make the payers anonymous. But it would be better if the payees, which are businesses, not people, if their income was all tracked.
I think we're done. Thank you very much.
One more question, please. Have you ever considered working along with 5 parties in a mutual campaign in order to promote free software and freedom in general?
I guess I don't understand. I never in the abstract considered the idea of working with 5 parties, but I wouldn't refuse to try. Do you have something specific, concrete in mind? It sounds like maybe you do.
I'm talking about the mutual campaign, mostly an internet campaign, some talks,
Well, maybe.
to support each other.
Maybe. I mean, have you got possibilities in mind, we can talk about it. I don't have an answer because it depends on details. Let's talk about the details.
We can talk over it. Thank you.
Okay, one more question from me. There is a huge gap between software as a service and software running on users' computers. What approaches would we establish to ensure users' freedom on SaaS, on services?
Oh. You should not entrust your own computing to somebody else's server. If you do that, you lose control over it. It's inherently equivalent to running a non-free program on your own computer to do that computing, and you shouldn't ever do that. So you shouldn't ever entrust your computing activity to somebody else's service. It's automatically bad for you. It's automatically an injustice. So we use the term, when we say SaaS, it doesn't mean software as a service. It means service as a software substitute. Anytime a service is a substitute for running a program, it's bad, automatically, regardless of the details. And the reason is, when you run a program on your own computer, when you run your copy of the program on your own computer, if it's free software, you have control over it. And that's how it should be. You should always have control over it. If you replace your copy of a program with using somebody else's service, you can never have control over what that service is doing. It's somebody else's computer running programs chosen by that somebody else. You can't possibly control that. So it's bad. It's an injustice to you. So never accept a service for something a program could in principle do. If you could do the job by running a program on your computer, assuming you had the right program, then it's your own computing, and the only way you should ever do it is by running your copy of a free program on a computer you control. A service that offers to do that job for you is an attack on your freedom. It's unacceptable.
What about Ethereum architecture? I don't know if you know it.
I'm scared of Ethereum. I'm very scared of the idea of contracts that people can't break. Does this mean no bankruptcy? Very dangerous. Where people can't get rid of their debts through bankruptcy, it makes oppression. In the US, around 10 years ago, they changed the law so that people can't get rid of their student debt through bankruptcy. And this is crushing people. So the very idea, the very goal of Ethereum strikes me as dangerous. Now, I'm not saying it necessarily is bad, but it's scary. I don't want to get involved in those contracts. Now, maybe in some cases it won't do any harm. But how far will that go? And will it start doing harm? That I can't see. I can't see far enough to know the answer. I can only see that we shouldn't be so quick to believe it's good.
Thank you.
So, it's time now to auction the GNU. Oh, and by the way, I'd like to mention that over there we are selling Free Software Foundation merchandise. Like, we're selling these little GNU/Linux inside stickers for €2. And we have Run GCC stickers for, I think it's €3. And we have gold lapel pins for €15. But this I hope to get a lot more money for. This is the adorable GNU that needs a home. So I'm going to auction it for the benefit of the Free Software Foundation. If you buy it, I can sign the card for you. If you have a penguin at home, you need to get a GNU for your penguin. There should never be a penguin without a GNU. We can accept payment either in cash or with a bank card if it can make international purchases by phone, or with Bitcoin if you have something here to make the Bitcoin payment with and show me. When you bid, please wave your arm and shout the amount you're offering so I can hear you. If a bid is made and the auctioneer doesn't notice that the bid really happened, strange philosophical conundrum. Let's make sure it doesn't arise today by bidding loud.
We are Gotland country.
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're saying. So don't bid. This is to raise money for charity. I'm going to start with our usual fee, the usual price, which is 25 euros. Do I get 25 euros? How much? 30. 30. I've got 30. Do I get 35 or more for this adorable canoe? How much? 35. I've got 35. Do I get 40? 40 euros for this adorable canoe? I've got 35. Do I get 40 for this adorable canoe? 40 euros to the Free Software Foundation to defend free. How much? I've got 40. Do I get 45? I've got 45. Do I get 50? Do I get 50 for this adorable that needs a home? Do I get 50 euros to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom? 50 euros or more. Last chance to bid 50 or more. Last chance to bid 50 or more to the Free Software Foundation to defend freedom. Going, gone for 45.